Welcome to Army Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. Following all the news which have been reported by American, Canadian, and European channels, Asian, African channels, and news agencies, writers, AFP, AP have also reported the same news. I am thankful to all these news resources. Now the headlines. Bodies of food workers in Gaza have been shifted. Ukraine has changed its recruitment policy. Deadly earthquake in Taiwan has killed many people and damaged many buildings. Israeli parliament was attacked by hostages' families. Northeast of USA have storm, rain, snow, and central part of USA has tornadoes. Immigrants' long journey from Mexico. NATO again pledged to support Ukraine. Uganda's strong LGBTQ laws. Too many elephants in Botswana. An American was killed by an elephant in safari. China's meddling in Canada's elections. Now the news in detail.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Navaz. On the NewsHour tonight, Israeli officials say their deadly strike on an aid convoy in Gaza was a result of misidentification.
President Biden and former President Trump win Tuesday's primaries, but both see protest votes that hint at challenges come November.
And our report on major shifts in immigration, following asylum seekers from around the world moving through Mexico to the U.S. border.
It's not just that women or men are traveling by themselves. They're traveling with their families. We are seeing a lot of different profiles with a lot of vulnerabilities.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Consumer Cellular, this is Sam. How may I help you? This is Pocket Dial. Well, somebody's pocket. Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular, you get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing. Have a nice day.
A successful business owner sells his company and restores his father's historic jazz club with his son. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you bring people together. Life well planned.
the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Today, the bodies of foreign aid workers killed in an Israeli strike early yesterday morning have left Gaza and are being flown to their home countries.
They worked for World Central Kitchen, whose founder today accused Israel of targeting his employees deliberately. That's an accusation that Israel denies. Nick Schifrin starts our coverage.
He had flown 7,800 miles from home to help feed the hungry. Today, he began his final journey home, pushed out of a morgue. American-Canadian Jacob Flickinger was 33 years old. He leaves behind his partner Sandy and their 1-year-old boy. With him as he crossed the Egyptian border today, his friends in life and death, Australian Lozami Frankom, known as Zomi, Damien Sobel from Poland, and their British security team, John Chapman, James Henderson, and James Kirby, whose cousin today remembered him as someone who wanted to help.
He was completely selfless, which explains why he went to Gaza.
World Central Kitchen, or WCK, says it coordinated with the Israeli military late Monday night as a convoy left its warehouse in Deir al-Bala by the sea in central Gaza. The group says Israeli munitions hit an initial vehicle. Workers then moved to another vehicle that was struck, and then a third vehicle that was struck as they traveled on or next to the coastal road that Israel designates for humanitarian aid.
We were targeted deliberately, non-stop, until everybody was dead in this convoy.
Jose Andres is the founder of World Central Kitchen. He's a celebrity chef whose activism and charity has earned him deep respect among policymakers. The group also fed Israelis after Hamas's October 7th terrorist attack. He spoke to Reuters today.
It looks like it's not a war against terrorism anymore. Seems this is a war against humanity itself.
Israel denies that accusation and says it takes pain to limit civilian casualties. In response to the attack, it opened a joint situation room with international humanitarian groups and launched an investigation whose initial finding was laid out last night by Chief of the General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzl Halevi.
It was a mistake that followed a misidentification at night during a war in a very complex conditions.
And today, a U.S. official confirms that President Biden will speak with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow. For more on this, we get two views. Retired Master Sergeant Wes Bryant had a 20-year career in the Air Force and deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. As a joint terminal attack controller, he called in airstrikes and led air targeting cells. He's also the co-author of Hunting the Caliphate, America's War on ISIS, and Dawn of the Strike Cell. And retired Israeli Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus had a 24-year career in the Israeli...
I don't doubt that the IDF is calling off strikes, is aborting in some cases. They're just not doing it enough.
I know there's a lot more to discuss. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you both, Wes Bryant, Jonathan Conricus. Thanks very much for both your time.
Thank you.
In the day's other headlines, a massive early spring storm brought a late winter to New England. The region braced for more than a foot of snow, especially in New Hampshire and Maine, with winds gusting up to 60 miles an hour. The storm also drenched the mid-Atlantic and Northeast with heavy rain. Elsewhere, several states in the South and Midwest were cleaning up from tornadoes and flooding a day earlier. The extreme weather was blamed for at least one death. Authorities in Taiwan report 9 people were killed and hundreds hurt after the island's strongest earthquake in a quarter century. It struck during morning rush hour just off the eastern coast, about 90 miles from Taipei, the capital. Some older buildings tipped over, including one leaning at a 45-degree angle. Taiwan's vice president said rescuers spent the day searching for survivors.
The most important thing right now is to rescue people. We have to check carefully how many are still trapped. We must quickly help them, and the wounded should be given the best medical care.
Aftershocks continue throughout the day, but quakes are common in Taiwan, and much of the population quickly returns to their routines. In Ukraine, the government has lowered its military conscription age to 25 as it tries to replenish its armed forces after 2 years of war. President Volodymyr Zelensky signed 3 bills into law today. They cut the draft age from 27 and also eliminated some exemptions. NATO foreign ministers agreed today to begin planning long-term military support for Ukraine. The diplomats, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, met in Brussels. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg pointed to the stalemate in Congress over American aid.
Because every time I meet representatives from the US Congress, I met many of them over the last weeks, they assure me that there is a majority in the US and also in the US Congress for support. But so far they haven't been able to turn that majority into a decision, and that's exactly what we all now are waiting for, and it is urgent.
Stoltenberg is pushing a $100 billion fund for Ukraine over 5 years, but so far the reaction among NATO members has been mixed. Uganda's constitutional court has upheld an anti-gay law that calls for the death penalty in some cases. The judges declined to overturn the law today. They did void some sections, including one that criminalized the failure to report homosexual acts. The statute targets what it calls, quote, aggravated homosexuality, involving sexual relations with a minor or when the accused is infected with HIV. Back in this country, crews in Baltimore cleared more wreckage of the Francis Scott Key Bridge 9 days after a giant cargo ship smashed into it. A second temporary channel has now been opened near the cobweb of jagged steel and concrete. Plans call for a third channel to let larger ships pass.
Those 2 alternate channels so far have produced 8 commercial vessel transits. Those are tugs and barges inbound and outbound from the Port of Baltimore. So those 2 alternate channels are beginning to make a difference. There's much more work to go, but those are, again, small steps in a long marathon.
One shipping terminal is still operating in Baltimore's outer harbor. The company says it expects to unload 10,000 imported cars and trucks from backlog ships over the next 15 days. Federal prosecutors are sharply criticizing a court order in former President Trump's classified documents case. Federal Judge Aileen Cannon had asked attorneys to submit potential jury instructions, and she appeared to accept Mr. Trump's argument that he acted within the law. But in a filing late Tuesday, prosecutors called that, quote, a fundamentally flawed legal premise. And on Wall Street, stocks mostly steadied after Tuesday's sell-off. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 43 points to close at 39,127, but the Nasdaq rose 37 points and the S&P 500 added 5. Still to come on the News Hour, former President Trump's increasing use of incendiary rhetoric on the campaign trail. Amid rising costs following fires and storms, FEMA is easing access to federal disaster assistance. A look at the historic rise in viewership of women's college basketball, plus much more.
This is the PBS News Hour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Last night, voters in Wisconsin, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island turned out for their state's presidential primaries. For more on the results and what this means for the upcoming election, White House correspondent Laura Barone-Lopez joins us now. So, Laura, 4 primaries last night. What were the biggest takeaways?
So President Biden and former President Donald Trump both won their primaries respectively, but 2 notable takeaways. There was a large Biden's campaign, as well as anti-Trump Republicans like Sarah Longwell think that they are persuadable and could go to President Biden.
Laura Barone-Lopez, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Trump and Biden continue to make the case for their campaigns directly to voters. Just yesterday, the former president made stops in 2 critical battleground states. Lisa Desjardins is here to break down his message. Lisa?
Whatever you call the former president, he clearly is a showman, right? And, it's not just part of his persona, but Trump's following comes from his speeches and directly from his words, not staff or infrastructure in the way it made for more traditional campaigns. Now, I know voters are already exhausted. I've been talking to you by a lot of the political shrapnel going around, but Trump's speeches in Michigan and Wisconsin is implying to some of his followers violence may be okay, and you saw that in Laura's numbers.
Lisa Desjardins, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Last month, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, made some big changes to its disaster relief programs. Changes that the agency called, quote, the most significant updates to disaster assistance in 20 years. Among them, expanding access to money for food, water, and other essentials. Funding immediate housing needs when people can't return home. Help for repairs not covered by insurance. Reducing paperwork required for temporary housing, and more. For more on what these changes mean, I'm joined now by FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. Welcome back. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Em. That's great to be here.
So, as you know, FEMA's long faced criticism long before your tenure even for being slow to respond in disasters, bureaucratic to deal with. I guess the big question is, why couldn't many of these changes have been made sooner if they are so needed and significant?
I think the changes that we made, one, they're transformational for sure, and we are extremely excited about them. But to make changes of this magnitude, it takes time. And part of the time was really spent listening.
Administrator Deanne Criswell, thank you so much for being here today. Great to speak with you.
Thanks, Amna.
Apprehensions of migrants at the U.S. southern border reached a record high at the end of last year. But before crossing into the U.S., many in this increasingly global group travel more than 1,500 miles through Mexico. With producer Sam Weber and Christine Romo, we recently went to Mexico's southern border with Guatemala to report on this desperate journey. When we met them on this Chiapas, Mexico roadside, these families, originally from Venezuela, had already been walking for 15 days. Where are they heading now?
We are going to the United States, God permitting.
Why did you leave? My country. The government is horrible. Under a blazing sun, in near 90-degree heat, they share that they're heading to the U.S. to seek asylum. We ask what they need. Water.
Food for the children.
10-year-old Brittany has already witnessed and lived what no child should.
We had to pass through the jungle and cross rivers. They stole our money and lied to us.
When's the last time she had any food or water?
I don't know.
But she's fueled by a simple dream.
I want to study.
Study? What do you want to study?
Doctor.
Little brother Jason is just 5.
I'm going to the Disney Castle.
You're going to the Disney Castle. And with that, they press on. Each step they hope bringing them closer to a better life. As migration worldwide erupts to record levels, this part of southern Mexico has become a global crossroads, with thousands of asylum seekers passing through each day, most on their way to the United States. On what asylum seekers face when they cross the border and how U.S. immigration officials are coping with it all.
Monday night's March Madness game, in which Iowa beat LSU to go to the Final Four, was watched by more than 12 million viewers on ESPN, making it the most watched women's college basketball game ever.
That's right, Jeff. In fact, it was the most watched college basketball game ever on the cable channel, men's or women's. John Yang joins us now with more. John?
Well, Jeff, that audience was bigger even than last year's record-setting NCAA championship game between the same two teams, and that was on ABC.
Live with it, and it's it was incredible to hear her teammates have her back and support her, which led to that emotional response.
Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And join us back here tomorrow night for our exclusive conversation with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on efforts to increase security cooperation in Asia. And that is the News Hour for tonight. I'm Amna Navaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. Thank you for joining us, and have a good evening.
France 24, a different point of view.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Family and friends pay tribute to the aid workers killed by Israeli strikes in Gaza. Their bodies have now arrived in Egypt via the Rafah crossing and on their way back to their home countries. The deaths increasing pressure on Israel to halt its attacks. NATO unveils a statue of Harry Truman as it celebrates its 75th anniversary in Brussels. Foreign ministers have gathered to discuss further funding for Ukraine, as well as efforts to keep the alliance alive, should, for example, Donald Trump win the US presidency. And emergency workers in Taiwan continue urgent work to prevent more casualties after the island is hit by its largest earthquake in 25 years. At least 9 people are known to have died, while around 1,000 were injured. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Alexander Alcott. Now, the bodies of 6 aid workers killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza are now making their way back to their home countries as the attack significantly increases pressure on Israel to halt its bombardments of the enclave. Israel's military chief said the strike was a mistake that should never have happened following a misidentification during the night. But Jose Andres, who founded the charity, claimed it was a direct attack on clearly marked vehicles whose movements were known by the Israeli military.
These happened over more than 1.5, 1.8 kilometers. So this was not just a bad luck situation where, oops, we dropped the bomb in the wrong place or no. This was over 1.5, 1.8 kilometers with a very defined humanitarian convoy that had signs in the top, in the roof, a very colorful logo that we are obviously very proud of, but that's very clear who we are and what we do.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister, as you may expect, has been fielding angry calls from the heads of state of those killed, demanding answers as to why their nationals were killed in this way. The leaders of the US, UK, Canada, Australia and Poland have all been in touch as the victims' bodies entered Egypt on their way back to their respective countries.
Leaving the Rafah morgue, the bodies of the humanitarian workers killed in an Israeli strike were on their way back home. 6 of the 7 victims were foreigners, aged 25 to 57.
Stop your support for the Israeli occupation army. Stop giving them money, equipment and weapons, because those weapons killed your countrymen today.
Among the victims, 35-year-old Damian Sobol, a cheerful Polish aid worker, 33-year-old Jacob Flickinger, a Canadian Armed Forces veteran, and 47-year-old British citizen James Kirby, whose body was being repatriated to his hometown of Bristol.
Not only James, but the 6 other individuals. They're heroes to us. They went out there selflessly to help some of the most desperate people in the world at the moment.
US-based food charity World Central Kitchen had become a key humanitarian actor during the war in Gaza, where it helped serve more than 32 million meals in the past 6 months. But the NGO, which had been coordinating its movements with Israeli forces prior to the strike, suspended its operations in the region, threatening to pile even more misery on the Palestinian enclave.
The World Central Kitchen was providing aid, and Israel's goal is to halt any assistance reaching the Palestinian people. Where do we get aid from now? They were the ones who helped us the most.
On Wednesday, a World Central Kitchen ship carrying 240 tons of supplies made its way back from Gaza to Cyprus, as the charity mourned the loss of its 7 heroes in what it called a targeted attack.
Now, the United States, Britain and France have opposed a Russian-drafted UN Security Council statement that would have condemned an attack on Iran's embassy compound in Syria, which Tehran blames on Israel. The opponents said what happened on Monday in Damascus remains unclear, and Israel has not claimed responsibility for the strike that killed 7 members of Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Well, it was condemned, though, by the European Union, which said the inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises and personnel must be respected. In the early hours of this morning, Russian drones have hit homes in Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv, according to the city mayor, who said Moscow had carried out a repeat strike so that 3 rescue workers who'd rushed to the scene were killed. The drones hit the top floors of apartment buildings, triggering a fire in one and causing part of another to collapse. A statue of Harry Truman has been unveiled at the US mission to NATO in Brussels as the military alliance marks its 75th anniversary. The former US president was in power when the US became a founding member of NATO, which now finds itself facing external as well as some internal threats. Emerald Maxwell explains.
And President Truman signs the
When the alliance was created on April 4, 1949, NATO's 12 founding members hoped to counter the threat of post-war Soviet Russia's expansion in Europe.
To consult together whenever the territory or independence of any of them is threatened, and to come to the aid of any one of them who may be attacked.
That principle, enshrined in Article 5, means that an armed attack against one NATO member is considered an attack against them all. It's been invoked just once after the 9/11 terror attacks on the United States, and for decades the North Atlantic Treaty Organization maintained a period of peace in Europe. As the Soviet Union began to break up, NATO's relations with its leaders improved.
By constantly cooperating in all affairs related to shaping of the new type of world politics to moving forwards towards the new peaceful period of history.
That rapport wasn't to last, though, as Eastern European countries threw off the shackles of Soviet rule and chose to enter the political and military alliance in the 1990s and early 2000s. This reignited Russia's ire, whose leaders saw it as going against the spirit of the post-Soviet opening.
NATO continued to act in the post-Cold War logic. They did not follow the logic of the new thinking that Mikhail Gorbachev called for.
NATO now counts 32 member states. The latest, Finland and Sweden, joined in the last year, prompted by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. After years in the post-Cold War doldrums, with member states not meeting their defense spending targets, NATO has rediscovered its raison d'etre in the face of Russian aggression. That risk's been undermined, though, by Donald Trump's potential re-election if he carries out his threats to cut US funding or even abandon his NATO allies.
No, I would not protect you.
It could spell the end for the alliance.
Now, at least 9 people have been killed in Taiwan after the island was struck by its largest earthquake in a quarter of a century. Around 1,000 were injured by the magnitude 7.2 quake that triggered landslides atop of buildings and left many people trapped in tunnels that cut through the mountains. As we can see these pictures just coming in, many buildings are left leaning in a perilous manner and are having to be demolished by the security services. Overnight, many people chose to sleep outdoors, fearing aftershocks. Well, a little earlier, we were joined by Jan Kamazin de Broomby, who gave us more details.
18 buildings have been damaged significantly here in Hualien City, like this one here behind me. Hualien standing just kilometers away from the epicenter of the earthquake that has rocked Taiwan today, the largest earthquake Taiwan has experienced in the last 25 years. Now, this building behind me is being demolished safely and securely by firefighters to prevent other people from being injured, but some people here were not so lucky. We spoke to one person who said that his friend was living in one of the buildings that collapsed earlier today. She didn't make it out alive. His building also did not make it out. A wall of his lying dashed across the pavement onto the street. And there are also reports of people, dozens of people, trapped inside the mountains to the west of Hualien, a very touristy city known for its closeness to the mountains, and people there trapped inside tunnels with rubble that has run down from the mountains in landslides, keeping them trapped in there. The death toll at the moment is 9 people. That's a lot lower than the thousands that passed away in the earthquake in 1999, the last time there was an earthquake of this magnitude. Taiwan has been putting in significant steps to try and make sure that its infrastructure and its buildings are more suited to the environment in which it is. It lies on a fault line and experiences lots of earthquakes, but not many as big as this one.
Now, Peru's new Prime Minister, Gustavo Adrianzon, has survived a confidence vote he called in Congress as the government reels from a political scandal that's being dubbed Rolex-gate. The president, Dina Boluarte, is being investigated for suspected illegal enrichment after failing to declare her luxury timepieces and other jewellery valued at more than $500,000 as well as around $250,000 in bank deposits. The former head of the Spanish football, Luis Rubiales, has gone from bad to worse. Already fired in disgrace for forcibly kissing the World Cup winning player Jenny Hermoso, has now been arrested in a corruption probe over the awarding of the Spanish Super Cup to Saudi Arabia.
Former president of the Spanish Football Federation, Luis Rubiales, getting into a police van that was waiting for him on the tarmac. The 46-year-old was arrested at an airport in Madrid after flying in from the Dominican Republic. He was released shortly afterwards, according to a Spanish police spokesman. Rubiales is suspected of receiving illegal commissions when negotiating a lucrative deal to stage the Spanish Super Cup in Saudi Arabia. The competition's contracts are worth €40 million a year, with the deal brokered by a company owned by former Barcelona and Spain defender Gerard Piqué. 2 weeks ago, investigators searched 11 locations as part of a probe into alleged corruption, including Rubiales' house in Granada and the Spanish Football Federation's headquarters in Madrid, where several people were arrested. According to Spanish media, Rubiales could appear in court on Thursday.
No voy a dimitir.
It's the latest episode in his fall from grace. He was forced to step down from the Spanish Football Federation last September after forcibly kissing player Jenny Hermoso after the Women's World Cup final last summer. Rubiales is due to go on trial in Spain for sexual assault.
Now, the term white elephant was coined in Southeast Asia when ancient monarchs would give the sacred animals as both a blessing and a curse, as the recipient would be bound to spend huge resources on keeping them alive. Well, in the modern-day version of this, the president of Botswana has threatened to gift 20,000 elephants to Germany after it threatened to tighten restrictions on hunting imports. Monty Francis explains.
Botswana is overflowing with elephants. Thanks to conservation efforts, the country is home to some 130,000 of them, making up a third of the world's elephant population. A success story, to be sure, but many in Botswana have come to regard the massive creatures as a huge menace to property, crops, and even human life. So when Germany's environment minister suggested imposing stricter limits on hunting trophies, Botswana's president had some choice words. Speaking to a German newspaper, Magwitsi Masisi threatened to export 20,000 elephants to Germany, saying, quote, "If you like them so much, then please accept this gift from us," and adding, "This is no joke." Masisi says his country is paying the price for the world's conservation efforts, and that bans on hunting trophies hamper wildlife conservation, make anti-poaching efforts harder, and impoverish residents who depend on tourism. Adult elephants have no real natural predators in Botswana, and in an effort to control the population, the country has exported 8,000 of them to neighboring Angola. Also, as of 2019, for a hefty price, foreigners can buy a permit to hunt an elephant and take its head or skin home as a trophy, a practice denounced by animal rights groups. Germany is the largest importer of elephant trophies in the EU, a practice banned by others in the bloc, including France and Belgium. Last month, Botswana's wildlife minister made a similar threat to send 10,000 elephants to London's Hyde Park, as the UK argues over its own restrictions on hunting trophies. As the West debates a practice considered cruel by many, Botswana is eager for outsiders to be like it, unable to ignore the elephant in the room.
That's all for this edition. Stay tuned for more world news on Fast 24.
Wednesday night, Taiwan's worst earthquake in decades. A Canadian caught in the disaster and what prevented it from being worse. The former federal Conservative leader weighs in on foreign interference, why he believes China meddled in Canada's 2021 election.
I think a lot of people did not vote because they were intimidated.
Making a dent in Canada's auto theft crisis, what could drive down the problem and the hundreds of vehicles just recovered. Plus sacrificing everything to feed the hungry.
These are some of the best people out there doing the most important work.
Honoring the 7 World Central Kitchen workers killed by Israel in Gaza.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. In Taiwan, rescuers worked through the night searching for survivors trapped by an earthquake, the strongest quake to hit that island in 25 years. Buildings shook just before 8 a.m. local time. It's believed about 100 people are trapped in buildings, tunnels, and rock quarries. At least 9 people are known to have died. Hundreds more are injured. Dozens are stranded by rock slides, including 2 Canadians. Earthquakes are common in Taiwan, and this news anchor took it in stride while on air. The studio lights dancing above her. Epicenter of the 7.4 magnitude quake is along Taiwan's mountainous east coast, 18 kilometers southwest of a busy tourist city. People there scrambled out of buildings that are left leaning precariously. This is Taiwan's capital, Taipei, where some rooftop pools were spilling onto the streets below. Leet Dugarcha has our top story on the quake and the rescue.
Footage from Taiwan's western Hualien region shows the horror of the moment a multi-story building collapses onto a busy street. CCTV captures the chaos as dust fills the air and people scramble for safety.
Our house is 4 stories tall, and it was moving. It was shaking like it was ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum.
Raymond Buxton is a Canadian living in Taiwan. He and his family are safe but shaken and devastated over the deaths and damage.
I just hope that, some peace for the families, the loved ones that are lost.
Rescue operations are underway with firefighters and rescue crews risking their lives to save those trapped in the rubble. The devastation is clear as buildings lean precariously and landslides have destroyed the landscape.
It's the largest earthquake since in 25 years, and the 1999 earthquake released about 3 times more energy than yesterday's earthquake.
Taiwan lies along the Pacific Ring of Fire, where 80% of the world's largest earthquakes occur. The island is situated on the boundary between the Eurasian Sea Plate to the west and the Philippine Sea Plate to the east. The Philippine Plate is actively moving west, colliding with the Eurasian Plate and sliding under it, actively creating new mountains and lifting the surface of Taiwan.
It's a very unique and very complex tectonic setting, but similar in many ways to the west coast of Canada, where we have an ocean plate being pushed beneath North America.
It's a terrible event for the affected people, but I think it's also a testament to the preparedness and the planning that's gone on in Taiwan over the last several decades that gives them a societal resilience to this type of earthquake.
Taiwan's early warning system sent earthquake and tsunami alerts to phones seconds before the shaking started.
They told us brace for shock and head for shelter.
A similar system is set to launch in Canada next month. As Taiwan grapples with the fallout, the country's president is promising coordinated efforts to minimize the impact of the disaster and timely help to those who need it. Leet Dugarcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Pressure is mounting on Israel after it killed aid workers in Gaza. The founder of the charity they worked for accuses Israel of using food as a weapon of war. These 7 members of the World Central Kitchen died while delivering food to Palestinians, among them dual Canadian-U.S. citizen Jacob Flickinger. The head of the charity says it was a direct attack by Israel on 3 clearly marked vehicles.
That they were targeted systematically, car by car. This happened over more than 1.8 kilometers. So this was not just a bad luck situation where, we dropped the bomb in the wrong place, or no. This was a very defined humanitarian convoy that had signs in the top, in the roof, a very colorful logo that we are obviously very proud of, but that's very clear who we are and what we do.
He also says their deaths were a direct result of Israel's policy to restrict humanitarian aid to Gaza. The only reason they were there is because food is so desperately needed. Crystal Gamansing reports.
The bodies of the World Central Kitchen workers are on their way home. As ambulances headed towards the Egyptian border, other aid workers like Federico Desi mapped out how to proceed.
It's the first time that international aid workers are killed, and so for sure that has sent a shockwave across the community.
Desi and his team postponed their work in central Gaza as it takes them on the same road where the Israeli strike killed the 7 workers. Humanity and Inclusion does rehabilitation work with injured and disabled individuals and provides mobility devices.
The needs are so catastrophic, and we can't fail the Palestinians. We need to keep on and continue supporting them.
A GoFundMe page for Jacob Flickinger's young family says he arrived in Gaza in March ready to help. The retired member of the Canadian Armed Forces worked for WCK in Mexico as well. James Kirby's family says helping was also in his nature.
They are heroes, all 7 of them. But yeah, we're a little bit unhappy with the response from Israel, if I'm totally honest.
The Israeli Prime Minister on Tuesday called the strike tragic, adding such things happen in war. By Wednesday morning, the IDF's chief of staff apologized.
We are sorry for the unintentional harm to the members of WCK.
We were targeted deliberately, non-stop, until everybody was dead in this convoy.
A defined humanitarian convoy traveling on a defined humanitarian route. The founder of the charity is calling for a neutral investigation.
This looks like it's not a war against terrorism anymore. Seems this is a war against humanity itself.
To enhance protection for aid workers in Gaza and facilitate aid, Israel says it's opened a new humanitarian command center. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
In this country, former federal Conservative Party leader Aaron O'Toole says he's convinced foreign interference from the Chinese government led to the defeat of up to 9 Tory candidates in the 2021 federal election. He doesn't believe that affected the overall outcome of the election, but during testimony at the inquiry into foreign interference today, O'Toole and others stressed government officials did not do enough to warn the public and federal parties about China's meddling. David Aiken reports.
Aaron O'Toole says the Conservatives did not lose the 2019 election because of foreign interference by China, but some of his party's candidates did.
5 to 9 seats that I think were possibly changed as a result of foreign interference.
One of those was in the Vancouver area riding of Steveston, Richmond East, where nearly half of voters are Chinese. Conservative Kenny Chu won there in 2019, but lost in 2021 after being the target of a massive coordinated disinformation campaign.
Doors that have been open to me near 20-some months ago, as soon as they heard my Chinese name, Zhao Jingrong, they would shut the door in my face.
Serve strong indicators.
The disinformation campaign against Chu was flagged during the election period by Canadian security officials, who concluded that there were, quote, strong indicators that the Chinese government was behind it. But no one told Chu or the Conservatives, and no one did anything about it.
I've been betrayed. That's how I see it. Clearly, a genocide is taking place in Xinjiang.
One reason why Conservatives believe they were targeted by China, Michael Chong's motion to condemn China's persecution of Muslim Uyghurs as a genocide. In retaliation, Chinese diplomats in Canada plotted threats against his family. The federal government would end up expelling one of the diplomats involved. Chong, too, testified.
I would say that the Conservative Party was affected in about half a dozen ridings by the foreign interference activities directed by the government of the People's Republic of China.
But the Prime Minister on Wednesday all but dismissed that testimony.
I can understand where someone who lost an election is trying to look for reasons other than themselves why they might have lost an election. The reality is not a single riding or the result of the overall election was impacted or changed because of foreign interference.
Now, that's been the Prime Minister's basic line all along, but the inquiry he called has appeared to have amassed enough evidence and testimony so far that it just might challenge the Prime Minister's hard and fast conclusion. Donna.
All right, David in Ottawa, thanks. Other evidence came to light during yesterday's testimony of Toronto area MP Han Dong and whether he knowingly received support from China to help win the Liberal nomination and whether the Prime Minister will bring him back into the Liberal caucus. Dong was elected as a Liberal, but left caucus over allegations China helped clinch his 2019 nomination. Dong denies the claims and is suing Chorus Entertainment, parent company of Global News, over the issue. A newly unsealed CSIS report alleges Chinese state actors may have organized the busing of international students to Dong's nomination vote. That allegation has not been proven, and the CSIS report said the information is unsubstantiated. Dong has previously denied it.
Has the People's Republic of China played a role in your nomination, your election, since you replaced Mr. Tang?
Look, the answer is no, absolutely not.
During his testimony, he did reveal this.
I was reminded recently that by my wife that there was a bus came with students.
There was a bus coming with students?
Oh, there was a bus, with students coming to vote.
Okay.
Dong said he presumed that bus had been organized by the school. Mercedes Stevenson is with me from Ottawa. Mercedes, what's the Prime Minister saying about whether Dong could return to the Liberal caucus?
Donna, there was a marked change in the Prime Minister's tone when it came to Han Dong today. After vigorously defending his former Liberal caucus member, Trudeau would not comment on Dong, his future with the Liberal Party, or even say his name. The Prime Minister also refused to comment on an intelligence summary that had been submitted by Canada's spy agency CSIS to the Foreign Interference Inquiry. The document alleges an intercepted phone call between Dong and the Chinese consulate, where Dong allegedly states that even if the 2 Michaels were to be released in that moment, it would give ammunition to those who support a hardline policy on China, like opposition parties, and also advised Chinese officials on what would placate the Canadian public when it came to public opinion on the 2 Michaels and provide useful talking points for the Liberal Party. Dong says he's always advocated for the early release of the 2 Michaels and that he did not remember making the above statements and that they, quote, don't make a lot of sense. Global News twice asked the Prime Minister when he became aware of this CSIS summary and if it changed his opinion on Dong's future and possible return to the Liberal caucus. But all he would comment on was the importance of the inquiry and his own desire to testify.
The ongoing Foreign Interference Commission is an important way of highlighting some of the challenges we face and some of the solutions that we've put forward to keep our democracy safe. And I look forward to being part of it. I will be testifying before the Commission next week.
In the past, Trudeau had provided a full-throated defense of Dong.
One of the things we've seen, unfortunately, over the past years is a rise in anti-Asian racism linked to the pandemic, concerns being arisen around people's loyalties. I want to make everyone understand fully. Tan Dong is an outstanding member of our team, and suggestions that he is somehow not loyal to Canada should not be entertained.
Back in June, Dominic LeBlanc, a senior Liberal cabinet minister who is now the Minister of Public Safety, had said he was in talks with Dong about a potential return to caucus.
The Prime Minister mentioned to the caucus last week that I would be working on a process with Mr. Dong to decide when, if and how he returns to caucus, and that's the process that I'll be elaborating internally within the government and at the right moment with Mr. Dong over the number of weeks.
So whether or not that potential return to caucus will still be in the cards is a mystery at this point. One thing is for sure, all eyes will be on the Prime Minister next week when he testifies. Donna?
All right, Mercedes in Ottawa, thank you. Canada's stolen vehicle crisis coming up. How to put the brakes on car thieves. Hundreds of stolen vehicles have been recovered after a crackdown in Ontario and Quebec. Since December, Ontario Provincial Police and the Canada Border Services Agency say they've searched 390 shipping containers and seized almost 600 stolen vehicles that were about to be shipped out of Montreal. Eric Sorensen looks at what's driving these crimes and the strategy to stop them.
Every 5 minutes, a car in Canada is stolen. The numbers have spiked, up 48% in Ontario in 2022, as organized crime targets high-end vehicles for export. Many end up in containers to be shipped illegally through the Port of Montreal. Police and border services are fighting back, today showing off some of the hundreds of vehicles recovered in just the last 4 months.
Crisis, epidemic, it is a significant challenge for not just Ontario and Quebec, but our country.
And says the OPP Deputy Commissioner, there is the economic impact and the safety risk to police and the public.
The risk to public citizens, violent home invasions, carjackings, significant.
Most of the cars stolen and recovered are from the Greater Toronto Area, plus Ottawa, Hamilton, Niagara, Waterloo, and other regions. In all, Project Vector recovered 483 cars in Ontario, plus 115 more in Quebec, $34.5 million worth before they could be shipped to cities all over the world.
Today was a big hit out of the pockets of the organized crime groups that are responsible for these, and we're not done.
They're a long way from being done. While some 400 containers were searched, 1.5 million containers go through Montreal annually. Canadian Border Services says an additional 300 vehicles shipped by rail from the Toronto area were intercepted.
The CBSA is conducting its own targeting in the Port of Montreal, in Toronto rail yards, and even in the Port of Vancouver.
Ottawa convened a summit in February earmarking $28 million to tackle the crisis. Thieves are able to clone key fobs and reprogram computers, making even the newest models quick and easy targets. The insurance industry says more must be done.
Not an easy feat, but something that we're working with manufacturers, working with Transport Canada, working with our international partners to identify what other countries have had success. Making the vehicles more fortified to be able to be harder to steal is the ultimate goal.
There is incentive to do more. Last year, Ontario for the first time topped $1 billion in auto theft claims. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, NATO's plan for long-term military aid to Ukraine. NATO foreign ministers met in Brussels today, trying to find a way to move away from short-term support for Ukraine towards longer-term military assistance. They agreed to plan for a multi-billion-dollar aid package.
The details will take shape in the weeks to come. But make no mistake, Ukraine can rely on NATO support now and for the long haul.
NATO Secretary General put forward a proposal to create a $107 billion fund over 5 years. The plan is for NATO to have a more direct role in coordinating the supply of arms, ammunition, and equipment to Ukraine, taking over some of the work a U.S.-led coalition is responsible for now. And into a third year of war with Russia, Ukraine's president has signed a bill lowering the minimum age for conscription from 27 to 25. In the first weeks after the invasion, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians volunteered to serve. Many of those people are dead, wounded, or simply exhausted, and the army needs new recruits to fill the ranks. Showing up to feed strangers next, why the world needs humanitarian workers. Where would the world be without the helpers, the humanitarians who give their time, their energy, and sometimes their lives to help others? The charity called the World Central Kitchen was in Gaza because Israel is restricting deliveries of food and famine is setting in. Its work is based on the simple belief that food is a universal human right. It served 43 million meals in Gaza, and then Israel killed 7 of its workers. As Heather Yorks West reports, its founder says he believes Israel is better than the way this war is being waged.
In the worst conditions you can imagine, the best of humanity shows up. Words written by World Kitchen founder Jose Andres in the New York Times Wednesday, 2 days after 7 of the charity's workers were killed in Gaza by an Israeli airstrike. They are not faceless or nameless, he writes. They are not generic aid workers or collateral damage in war. They had come from all over the world to help. A dual Canada-U.S. citizen, Jacob Flickinger, was a retired member of the Canadian Armed Forces who had served in Afghanistan. He leaves behind a young family with a 1-year-old son. James Kirby, John Chapman, and James Henderson were all former soldiers in the British military, who also worked as private security contractors.
All highly trained, highly professional, and a truly tragic loss to both us and indeed their loved ones.
Hey, this is Zoe and Australian aid worker Zoe Francombe had previously delivered aid in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Haiti before her time in Gaza. Friends calling the 43-year-old a humanitarian hero.
There's no words. These are some of the best people out there doing the most important work, and People like Zomi are so selfless and only doing what they do because of their love for humanity.
35-year-old Damian Sobol of Poland and 25-year-old Saifuddin Issam Ayed Abu Taha also died trying to deliver food to a population threatened by both war and hunger.
Humanitarians and civilians should never be paying the consequences of war. This is a basic principle of humanity.
Jose Andres closed his New York Times piece with a final message about the lives lost. It is not a sign of weakness to feed strangers. It is a sign of strength. The people of Israel need to remember at this darkest hour what strength truly looks like. Heather, your West Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Yubo, British Columbia. Thanks for watching and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.